Hey everyone, I'm Trent Kusters, co-founder and studio director of League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I've had the pleasure of talking with Ben Gabbard and David Adams of Gunfire Games. Now, Gunfire Games are responsible for the critically acclaimed and commercial success this year, Remnant II, and of course its predecessor, Remnant, the Dark Souls with guns, looter shooter with incredible procedural generation, which we talk about in this episode. But of course, we kick it off talking about how these two got into games. And funnily enough, they were childhood friends making and designing their own board games and pen and paper games that then in their 1920s actually made their own video game that they ended up getting published, got a kickstart there. David went on to found Vigil as well, the studio behind Darksiders I, Darksiders II, incredible successes at their time, action adventure, absolute institutions. We talk about the time at Vigil. Then we also talk about the uncomfortable period around THQ's bankruptcy. And, I think in the backdrop right now of a lot of layoffs in the industry and everything is how do we then, what did it feel like to go through that when a parent company collapses and having to say goodbye to a bunch of teammates that you've worked on and what you've built up? We then talk about David's next studio and Ben coming together to make Gunfire Games and rising from the ashes there. We talk about how Facebook and Oculus gave them the kindling that started the studio with Chronos, their original game, and a game that they did work for hire before that as well. We talk about Remnant I, how that came about, how an original IP like that with such ambitions comes about in a studio, and how a team that had stuck together and worked together through all of these studios and all these different games can create something like that. We then naturally talk about Remnant II. We talk about the design of boss fights. We talk about what makes great procedural generation. And there's just a lot of chatter in here about what does make a great team and what it means to have people who have worked together for so long and what that brings to development. It's a wonderful story. David and Ben have had an incredible career within the industry and have left a number of fantastic titles in their wake. And obviously Remnant II is an incredible game that definitely deserves being dug into on this level. So whether you're playing the game or not, there's a lot in here for every developer, and I hope you enjoy. Ben, David, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yep. No doubt, no doubt. I mean, I just, I was logged on and all the Texas talk was happening with all the Mexican food chatter and everything. So I'm jealous that I missed a little bit of preamble, but we've got a phenomenal game to talk about here. But you two have quite a storied history as well in video games itself, and obviously Remnant II being the second game in the series as well. We've got a bit to get through. So let's start where we always do with the Game Maker's Notebook. And the question is, what was the first time that you remember in your lives, like that moment where game sort of caught you? So, maybe not the first time you played it, but the earliest memory of it having like a serious impact on on our like small child brains, changing them, synapses firing. Why don't you start, Ben?
Oh, okay. Goodness. Being rather older, I think that, we always used to play games as just make up our own games in our house, with my two brothers. I've known Dave for quite a number of years, probably, what are we at? Like 40 plus years. So he kind of grew
Amazing.
up with us in terms of being young. And we would just make up games, play games, just in general. And as technology started advancing, it just seemed to be a natural evolution for us to just be, involved in that kind of media. Whether it was, the Atari 2600 when it first came out, and we were renting that console to bring in and play some games, and then as Nintendo, launched, and all the other kind of consoles as it came about, and then PC obviously coming online as well during that time frame, where it was DOS and then into Windows. And so I think from my perspective, it's always been something we've always gathered around and played board games, and it was
Yeah.
just a natural extension of what we already were doing in this new medium, and it was easier to set up because everything was set up, and you're like, cool, that's awesome. I don't have to put everything together, put it down, and. So I think from that perspective, that was probably my first memories of it. Playing with my brothers
So
and family and friends.
And when you say like making your own games, I'm assuming naturally you mean on the computer, right? Like programming your own games as well? Or do you mean like running around or board games or?
Running around with board games, just coming
Yeah.
up with rule sets, just different things. We big Game Workshop fans back in the day.
Oh,
With some of the
awesome.
things
Yeah.
that they were coming out with, and just different role playing adventures, and
Oh, yeah.
you just get Lego guys or Lego blocks, and you come up with games and just create rule sets for that, and just on the board. Again,
Yeah.
because computers weren't very prevalent at the time, and so
Mm.
that was rare to have somebody with a PC in their house that would be coding and doing those kind of things at that. And then as it
Yeah, of
got
course.
introduced, obviously that started, manifesting itself. And then we started seeing trade wars and these BBS type of games and those type of
Yeah.
elements coming online that were introduced, at least to us. And then you were like, wow, you can get some floppy disk and put this in. You're playing the first Sierra games, and you're starting to learn, Police Quest and all these other kind of things. And, and then they would have a 1-800 number to call for hints and stuff. So it was kind of interesting to just see the dynamics in that roll out. And I think, being on that level back in the, early 80s, or I'm going to date myself here, or in the the early 70s 80s, and that's where gaming kind of evolved for me, at least in terms of
Amazing.
that passion and seeing that result.
I still remember one of the big ass kickings that I received from my parents was from a Nintendo hotline number that I used to call religiously. It only lasted a month until the telephone bill came in and I was outed.
That's exactly what would happen, and you'd be like, oh man. So
So
quite
Dave,
interesting.
you're am I hearing right? You two are childhood friends?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think
Amazing.
I was originally friends with his brother in like third
Yeah.
grade. I think when I was 8.
Yeah, got to do the brother stuff.
But we've known each other since then for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you recall these early game making days running around?
There's a lot of games. I know for me personally, like the first game I remember is Pitfall. Only because I can't remember. Some family friend had an Atari 2600, and we went to their house, and I was just like, this. I mean, I think I'd played like Pong games before that.
Yeah, of course.
Games with a little ball bounce. I know I'm going to sound really old for a minute. That's really not
safe
bad.
space. We're
Anyway,
total,
so
go as old as you are.
I remember playing Pitfall, and like I would always just be so excited to go back to the house, just literally just to play Pitfall. And then at some point, I realized there were other games. I never had an Atari 2600. The first system I had was the NES, but like I think that was the first thing that got me intrigued.
Do you remember what it was? Was it the sense of adventure in Pitfall that wasn't there for, like, say, a Pong or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I liked it. Like, I like the theme of Pitfall. I liked what you were doing. Obviously, in that era, I was a huge fan of Indiana Jones and all that kind of stuff. So, I think it just like ticked a lot of boxes for me. And then I think for me personally, like I was always interested in like making games. I remember playing Final Fantasy on the NES, and it came with this fold out with like all the sprites for all the characters.
Oh wow!
And I realized this is before I knew anything about computers. I'm like, oh, they're all just little dots. So I like at some point my dad got me an 8086, and I like made my own paint program just so I could make all the stupid Final Fantasy sprites. Which is dumb because there probably were already paint programs. I don't know, but I didn't know as a kid. So, but I like this thing where you like hit an arrow key to go to a spot, and then you like hit a space bar to, and then you hit another key to bring up the color wheel to pick a color. And I like colored in all the stupid Final Fantasy sprites one by one out of that. But yeah, I've always been interested in like how things work. So
I love that childhood like Wizard of Oz, man behind the curtain moment of like it's all just dots. It's just like a galaxy brain moment.
Well, I think you had arcades growing up, right? That you would go, and now all of a sudden that technology was being here in your house, and you're like,
amazing.
"Oh my gosh, this is amazing!" And I'm not paying quarters for it. It's like I can just consume it as we're going along. So I think that was one of the, just that accessibility really just stimulated a lot of neurons in your heads to say, "Hey, this is pretty cool."
Yeah. So obviously we've got the board game making, like for fun times with your pals when you're kids. We've got the, making your own dots and, your own sprites and coloring in and stuff like that. When was the first time, was it high school? Was it college? Like that the two of you kind of figured out that, individually or whatever it may be, that this was something that you did want to do, that this could be a career for you, Dave?
I don't know. I made like 3 text adventures.
You were in
some weird, I don't know if you remember, like there used to be these old 2D games that were kind of 3D, but like the view would kind of scroll by when you moved.
Yes.
Like whoosh, in blocks.
Yes.
I made one of those, which was like a total pain in the ass because it was all like 2D sprites. There wasn't actual 3D at all. It was just like 2D images that moved and simulated 3D. So I made like 15% of like 100 different games after I got that computer from my dad. Because I would just like, oh, that's cool. Oh, I'd play Ultima. I'd be like, oh, Fog of War. That's cool. Let me do Fog of War. So I'll make a little 2D overworld game with Fog of War. I'll do this or I'll do that.
Amazing. And how old were you at this time, Dave?
I'm trying to remember when I probably got it when I was like, maybe, I don't know. I can't remember. It was still too long. Whatever the age was, maybe 11 or 12, 10 to 12, somewhere.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Right into it early.
Young enough that I got in trouble and it got taken away from me. That's all I remember. And then in college, actually, me and Ben and his brother, there was this board game we loved called Dungeon Bowl. Mm-hmm. And it was like Blood Bowl. A lot of people probably heard of Blood Bowl, which is a game for workshop game, which is like fantasy football. Yeah. And Dungeon Bowl was like that in a dungeon. But we like modded the crap out of that game. Like we made it 3-player and we added like all these weird mechanics, and it played completely different than the actual official Dungeon Bowl game, but we loved it so much. We're like, hey, let's make the computer game version of this. So that was like the first game Ben also actually finished, which was called Crush Deluxe.
What was it called? Crush Deluxe?
It was called Crush Deluxe. It even got published by Mega Media. I think we got like $50,000 for it.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Ways. Yeah,
that's so great. And all right, Ben, fill me in. Like, were you guys studying computer engineering at college, or what were you actually doing at college whilst this was all happening?
Again, I think at the time, since I was a little older, I was working. Dave was going to school. My brother was going to school, and we were sitting here thinking, hey, we came together, and again, we were playing this board game. And as I said, the impetus of the computers and being able to do this and seeing it, there was an opportunity for us to say, hey, what if we did this? There's shareware out there. We could do these kind of things that it would be an interesting, you're young and you're naive and you're like, hey, let's just go about and do it. Make it a let's go and try it. And so we went to an E3 when it used to be in the George Dome to sell our product. We were out there and we made business cards on the fly there in Atlanta. Okay, we got business cards. We got our own little Stone Jackal Studios.
Did you have a little company name or anything?
We did have a little company name. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We went down there, and you're like, oh, this is so cool, and we're showcasing this. And we, I think from that perspective, that's where we just said, let's just do this because we've always been interested in this game. We've always been, these type of things, and let's grow from that. And that was the first time that we had done that. And that had to, what was it, 90? God, 93, 94,
Doom 3
something
came
like
out.
that.
That's all. They were announcing Doom 3 at E3.
Windows
Yeah,
3.1. It was
They had,
launched on Windows
they had
3.1.
colored lighting. That's and
Yeah.
the Nintendo
Yep.
64 was at the
Yeah.
Silicon Graphics booth.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
hadn't come out yet.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
so so it was like pretty old in terms of when we did that. And then going from there, as you're young, some of the things start happening. I chose to get married.
Yeah.
We were doing some different things, and while 50,000 sounds like a lot back then, for 2 years worth of work, it didn't look like a viable thing to live with. And so
Yeah, right.
I took a break from that because I started a family. And so you got to make money, you got to do that. And then Dave started a different avenue for him, so we kind of parted ways there for a little bit, and then came back together at Vigil. Dave, was working at Vigil at the time, and started Vigil up, and said, "Hey, we always stayed in contact. I go to E3, always all that kind of contact." And it was like, "Hey, you should try this, do a career move." And it was like, "All right, man, let's do it." Do I continue on the road that I was going, or do I go back to what we've always had a passion around?
Yeah.
And so at that point, we just made that decision and came back. And so that's kind of where we were at. That's kind of like the journey.
Amazing. And so let's pause where we're at there, Ben, and
Sure.
let's travel back a little bit, Dave. So I'm actually going to ask one question. Just I'm interested about this publishing deal out of the 90s that you did on this game. Did you make the game and then someone bought the distribution rights? Right. So
the game was completely done. In fact, we'd released it shareware. So we literally were getting orders in the mail for the game. That's what we were dealing with at the time. I don't remember where I don't even remember how we posted it. I guess on the internet somewhere, I would just assume. Yeah. And then it was like, hey, here's the demo of the game. If you want the full game, send us this amount of money in the mail. And then we found someone locally that would print a CD with the game on it, with the logo on it, and we'd mail that shit out to them if they sent us the money. That's basically how it worked.
Awesome. And then at some point, 21, 23 at this time or something like that, right?
No, younger. I was in college. So I was probably
18, 19. Yeah, 19, 22. Yeah, somewhere right around that type of time frame.
And then some guy named Raj, I can't remember his last name.
I can't remember his last name.
He called Mega us. Media. He's like, I'll take the game from you guys. Publishing rights, $50,000. We're like, that's an infinite amount of money. Let's do it.
That's so crazy. Wow. Can you imagine? What if we did this? And then that's how that would work. Yeah.
And we did the shareware version was smaller than we did make a bigger version for Mega Media.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We added a bunch of features to flesh it out. And by a bunch, I mean, I don't know, we worked on it 3 more months.
Yeah.
I'm not talking a massive amount of time, but
so let's talk about these diverging paths now. As Ben said, he went off, had some life things to do, get married, stuff like that. But Dave, you've got this, you've all got this money, this $50K. You've realized that it's not going to sustain you so much, but it sounds like you continued on with games before you then reconnected at some point. So what happened after that game for you?
I finished college. I got a job at a startup for a year.
Yeah.
But I still worked on games. The problem is I could do all the programming stuff, but I didn't really know anybody to do anything else. So I would try to cobble together my own art or whatever. I also got married and had a kid. So but at some point I was like, screw it. I want to make games bad enough. So I left the startup and started a company called I'm trying to remember,
Remnant Interactive. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we worked on first we worked on a 3D version of Trade Wars, which is an old BBS game.
Yeah.
But that eventually became a Diablo style MMO type game.
Right.
Because MMOs were really big back then.
Yeah.
So worked on that for a while. It eventually came out. It was this game called Dungeon Runners. It went through many multiple lives before it actually came out as Dungeon Runners. And then that company got acquired by NCSoft, which moved me to Austin. And then I left NCSoft to start Vigil Games. Yeah. So, and that's probably Darksiders. We made Darksiders. It was the first big game.
Of course.
But it was kind of the same thing. Never worked on a console game. Never made an action-adventure game. Never did. I was just like, fuck it. That's the kind of game I want to make. So
that's awesome.
We just left and then just figured it out. And zero experience. Nothing. I've never made a game with a jump in it. Never made a game with sword combat. Yeah. Never did any of that stuff. Just figured it out and made Darksiders.
Right. And so the move to Austin, because around that time, Austin was a hub for MMO development and everything as well.
Oh, yeah. Everybody made MMOs in Austin.
Yeah. There was
that was part of the reason, because I was like, I just wanted to work on a console game, so there wasn't like another company in town making console games. So I was like, well, we'll just make our own company in town that makes console games. And there were a couple other guys I worked with that were similarly minded, so we left, and that's why we started Vigil. But you're right. It was like all MMOs all over the place.
Yeah.
It's like MMO City over there at the
time. So tell me about those early days of Vigil and those moments to decide to kick things off. Did you bootstrap? Did you have some mysterious another Raj call you and say, I want to back you guys? Like how did this come about? How do you make
we totally bootstrapped. So it's funny because while I was at NCSoft, I flew down to Epic and they were showing off Unreal 3. I guess it was 3. Yes, Unreal 3. It wasn't even out yet. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And the first thing I did when I got home was like, I just want to make an engine like that. I don't want So I started to make an engine in my spare time. And so by the time we left NCSoft, I already had a pretty advanced 3D engine working. I mean, advanced for the time, not for today. But so I spent a lot of time building the engine from the ground up, like all the 3D stuff, sound, everything, editor, the whole nine. And then we used that and we made a demo of Darksiders. And it was like, it's funny. I have the video of that. I probably have that demo somewhere, but it's just it was really primitive, but we spent a lot of time on the basic feel to make sure hey, jumping feels good. And we had glide in there and you could fight some dudes. And it was simple graphics, but it felt really, really good. Yeah. And we started shopping that around, and then NCSoft actually hired us to finish that Dungeon Runner game because it never got finished because they had canceled it. Right. So we did work for hire on that for a while while we were shopping Darksiders around.
And how many folks were you at this point in time? You're 5, 10 or something like that?
Yeah, I think we might have been 5 or 6 people when we were doing Dungeon Runner. Not a lot, maybe 5. And then it looked very likely for a while that we were going to do a Sly Cooper game on PSP.
Oh, wow.
Yes, because they were like, hey, can you do a Sly Cooper? I was like, I don't know, send us a dev kit. And I went ham for 2 nights and got our engine running on the PSP, and they were pretty impressed. And then also Joe Madureira is one of the guys that founded drew some amazing Sly Cooper concepts that are still some of the coolest Sly Cooper concepts I've ever seen. So they were like, this looks amazing. And then right then, we were literally about to sign that deal, and THQ's like, hey, you guys want to do Darksiders? We're in. We're like, yeah, we want to do Darksiders. Wow. And then they're like, hey, why don't we just buy you? And then you can become an internal studio. And we're like, okay. And so that's where we had already founded Vigil Games, but that's how Vigil Games became a subsidiary of THQ and ultimately went on to make Darksiders.
Yeah. And Ben, were you on at this time, or did you come on?
No, I came after Darksiders 1 was shipped for Darksiders 2. Okay. But interesting to see this, because again, we're still friends, went to E3 with these guys and all this other kind of stuff with the team. And it was very interesting to get to know them because from Realm Interactive, some of those fellas, went to Austin and formed the Vigil studio. And so it was really cool to see that growth and that maturity and actually starting to play with the big boys, because Darksiders is a pretty, a robust title, and as Dave was saying, the first time it was a really cool to see, from the outside perspective. And so that's why it was always in the back of my mind. Oh, there's always that opportunity, and then it just kind of the stars aligned to kind of hey, come on out, let's do an interview, let's come out and talk to these guys, see if we can partner up again. So that's kind of how that worked.
So Dave, let's stay on Darksiders for just a second here, because the game is obviously phenomenal, and it's just such an achievement, especially for a studio first time around title. And one of the things that really strikes me, which is, I know we're going to talk a bit about this with Remnant as well, is that Darksiders just unapologetically knows what it is, and I think that was something that really, when I first saw the game, when I first played the game, when it came out, and hearing people talk about it or whatever, it was, and I mean that it knew what it was in regards to there didn't seem to be much cruft or anything that wasn't in its right place. It was a very tight and tidy game. How did from what you're telling me here, you just wanted to work on a console game, created an engine, and then Darksiders came out of you and your team's work there. But how did that concept come about, and how did you and your team, execute on something that, you would expect a studio that's worked in this genre, multiple times already to deliver?
I think, early on, I really, 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 really wanted to make a Zelda game because I love Zelda.
Yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the setting would be. And
Yeah.
I remember we were like meeting at my house, and then Joe Matarera was driving home, and he like called us on the phone. He's like, I got it. 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. But originally, the original idea is like, they're the 4 of the Apocalypse, and they're going to college. I was like, it's called Darksiders II. Where I was like, okay. So anyway, it started with that, but the idea of the Forest and the Apocalypse is really cool.
Yeah.
And it ended up where it ended up. But I think that like, I don't know, like I think it got to where it was just because we were ambitious and, didn't really know where to stop. Because honestly, it could have been a tighter game. Like, I agree with you. It turned out really tight, but it was a lot of work to get it there because we tried to do so many things. We had a flight sequence, but we had like gun sequences in that game. And of course, big bosses and puzzles and traversal and a large seamless world with no loading screens. And like, we did a lot of stuff that we really had no business doing because we were literally starting from scratch and like none of us had any experience with it. But like, I was pretty stubborn. Like I knew what I wanted in the game. And like, I just made sure. I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that don't think fondly of me at that time because I was very like, no, let's just do this. I don't care what it takes. Make it happen somehow. But I think in the end, there was some pride in the accomplishment. Like we pulled something off that we like really had no right to have been able to pull off.
Yeah.
So it felt pretty good. Plus no one believed, like even THQ was like, I don't know. Well, maybe we'll see what happens.
And so what then happened? Like you've shipped, well, maybe Ben, let's hear from your perspective. We shipped Darksiders 1, you come into the team. What's happening at Vigil? What's the hubbub after,
So when I came onto the team, they're working on Darksiders 2 with a smaller team, and they're working on an unreleased DMO, which is an MMO project with Games Workshop. So again, at geeking out as a kid, wow, that's the ultimate MMO. What a great franchise to work on. Dave's all excited about it. Like, man, we're doing this. We got Space Marines. It's so interesting. But you know what? I started on the Darksider side of things, which was cool, and coming on board and just learning the ropes and kind of like the new version of how games are made. And so there was a steep learning curve on what was going on with that, where my background is, people management and logistics and all these other kind of things, and coming back and saying, okay, how do I apply these skill sets to the new way that things are done, and ramping up on the technical jargon and ramping up on how it all works versus, your day-to-day 9-to-5 kind of jobs of what I was doing before. And so I think from that perspective, there was this learning curve of just learning the people, learning the environment, picking Dave's brain on stuff, and then and making sure that there was this element of I understood what was going on, and then being able to help out and assist and craft that experience of, hey, we're working on this Darksiders, and you come into a studio that's got 200 plus people. That's a lot of people to work through and understand and what's going on from that perspective. And so from coming on to as a I think there was my initial title was like a production, something in production. I can't remember. It was like not an associate
on your business card. Something in production.
Something in production. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't like a junior guy. But because I had some experience. Like, hey, you're not going to come in here and run things, but you're going to come in here and just learn the kind of the ropes. And so that's what cutting my teeth and doing. The 2 years on Darksiders and watching that and shipping that title and understanding that, and then the tumultuousness after that fact and going through all the THQ kind of churn was quite eye-opening from a standard, because I just uprooted my family and brought them out here to Austin, and now here we go. Here we go with, there's a lot more these highs and lows through the industry where you have that, hey, we're at the peak of shipping games, and here you are now selling the company and bankruptcy and what's going on from that perspective. And so it was quite interesting, that road, and just seeing the dynamics of the team and getting to know those folks. And I still talk to a lot of those guys today, and we still work with a lot of those guys today from the original group. And so I think that has always been, a fond memory from those days at Vigil.
Well, Ben, something interesting as well is like you the industry's been around long enough that there are studios like Gunfire where, they're run by folks, and there are folks who work there who've worked together across decades at multiple studios now and everything. And we can, you bring all of that experience, whether it be in your skill set or just in your, having closed out however many games and knowing where not to step and where not to tread, is there something that you remember when you came on board at that point in time and you're learning the ropes, watching like your childhood friend and like
Sure.
ex-colleague Dave and, all of his crew making games that you were really impressed by, that you think still is around today at Gunfire Games? Like, was there anything that you noticed then that is still sort of like a core of Gunfire Games?
I think the coolest part, or at least one of the things, at least for I think every studio has its own little experience and the nuances that go. And I think throughout the years and working with them, I think there's a passion of wanting to produce something special and something memorable and coming to fruition, no matter what roles people were playing in that. I think that everybody came to the point of, I want to make a good game. I want to make a product that I feel good about, and that will be lasting, and I can put my name on it and be proud that I have memorabilia on the wall, and I'm proud that I put my name associated with that. And I think cultivating that group and the camaraderie behind that, because you're doing, at that time we were doing, lengthy hours. You're doing a lot of, where we talk about crunch culture and stuff like that. Back then, that was more normalized in terms of like, hey, you just did what you needed to do to get the product and on time. And while that was very the same way in the real, I'm going to call it the real workplace, where you're working 9 to 5, you've got deadlines, you've got this. This was much more creatively like that, and it felt similar in that aspect. But then at the same time, there were much more, liberal feelings of like, there wasn't a time clock where you're punching it and saying, get in your seat at 9 and get out at 5. There was zaniness to it, like a much more interesting aspect versus the business professional that you think of when you work at, like a Goldman Sachs or something like that. Exactly. You're like, hey man, I'm not showing up. These guys are coming in shorts and a t-shirt and barely, with flip flops and, and hardly shaven and stuff. And so I think that was the culture shock for me, is like, wow, this is very unstructured from that regards, which is quite interesting. But at the same token, the energy level, the creative level, that part of being in those meetings and seeing how an idea comes to fruition and how all the people that are gathered in there come up with those little bits and create this awesome experience was really, really just, again, phenomenal to see it on such a larger scope.
Yeah, and I think as well, you can see that stuff like through the games that you all have worked on. Even Remnant, I mean, one of the most amazing things about Remnant that we'll no doubt talk about is like how many elements there are in the game that, again, seem to come together cohesively. And it's one of those things that I don't think can really happen unless you have a team sort of unified around a vision and really committed to that goal. But let's stay on Vigil for a second. So you're working on Darksiders II, you ship that as well, but obviously you're heading towards, THQ is heading towards Troubles, right, as well, Dave. So talk to me about like Vigil and Darksiders II and sort of coming into around, 2013, I think, THQ filed for bankruptcy, right?
Yeah, so we finished Darksiders II, like you said. Like Ben mentioned, we were making an MMO in the 40K universe called Dark Millennium Online. So that really ballooned the studio, because Darksiders 2, until the very end, was probably only like 70 people. Yeah. Now it ballooned up because we rolled a bunch of people from Dark Millennium Online because they shut that down. But I think that was that was probably the first pain we had, was because they shut down the MMO because they just couldn't afford it anymore. And so we had to lay off some folks at that point, and we kind of trimmed down to a smaller team to finish the game. And then we started working on another game, which was called Crawler. And we were working on that, and it wasn't a Darksiders game. And then, it was just like, I wouldn't say it came out of nowhere, but because you could see the warning signs, like people left, new people came on board, stuff was being shut down. You started to see the writing on the wall. And then it was like, no, it's okay. We're going to go bankrupt, but it's all right, because we're going to sell everything to this other company. It's all going to stay together and everything's going to be fine. And then I was actually at the bankruptcy auction in Delaware when they like started parting it out. And I remember they're like, never mind, that's not going to happen. Like literally at the bankruptcy auction, because I think it was contingent on some, like, turns out that the goal of bankruptcy is to maximize the amount of money that the shareholders received from the bankruptcy, not to do some
as much from it as you can.
Not to do some sweet deal where one company keeps it all. So it ended up getting parted out, and then for whatever reason, like Vigil just didn't get. No one bought Vigil, which I mean I could understand. Like Darksiders II was done. Yeah. The only project we were working on was nascent. It was an unknown IP. Yeah. And like all the other studios had projects that were like 6 months from being done or like a year from being done. And so when you're buying at a bankruptcy, like you're looking for the bargains, right? Exactly. So I was like, I remember I was reading the final book of The Wheel of Time at the bankruptcy auction. It was pretty funny. I was like, two things coming to an end at the same time.
Yeah. How meta. Incredible.
Yeah.
But like then another opportunity came out that you then went across to Crytek. Am I right? Crytek in Austin?
Yeah, we were like having an all hands meeting. And I think someone was talking to the team, telling them about just like, hey, your insurance will last this long or whatever. Yeah. And like Auni Yurley at Crytek called me. It was like 3:00 in the morning in Germany. He's like half asleep and he's like, hey, my brother wants you guys to come work with us. I was like, wait, what? Well, who are you, first of all? And they came out and they like met me in a hotel somewhere. He's like, yeah, but he's just got to get a feel for you and see if you're the right type of person. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. Like I was still in shock. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like I had literally no idea what I was going to do. So he's like, all right, well, let's do it. Invite people over you think they want to come work with you, and then we'll see how many people show up, and then we'll decide if we're going to do it based on that. And so I just like, I talked to Ben, we talked to a lot of the key people, and we're like, hey, you guys want to work for Crytek? And we're like, yeah, Crytek sounds badass, man. They make really cool games. They're pretty prestigious. So we like, I don't know where we met him at some like
it was a hotel
we had or something like that.
Some hotel that we were signing.
And he's like, hey, cool, a bunch of people showed up. All right, let's do this then. And they like pulled out some like contracts, like employment contracts, and basically like hired everybody on the spot. So wow, it was all over the course of like 2 days or something crazy.
Yeah, it was very quick.
Like I feel like he jumped on a plane the next day after he called me and flew out. So
holy shit, wow. And so Ben, obviously hearing it from Dave's perspective, and naturally, like as Dave's mentioned, these things, even when the writing is on the wall, they can happen very quickly. Like. How did it feel, sort of being in the team as well, like obviously, and with the, it's the irony isn't lost on me that we're sort of going back and talking about this as sort of like a key part or, a major event that happened in both of your journeys in development when, we've had over 6,000 people or something laid off in the industry now because of similar things, like parent companies shaving down or going under or whatever. It can be a pretty traumatic event when you're going through this stuff, and then you find yourself very, very soon after, like at another company. How did you sort of come out of it? And considering that you and a number of your team landed on your feet, was it kind of okay, or was it?
I think it was depressing. I think because you think of, hey, here you have this camaraderie, and like Dave said, it was about 70 or 80 people initially on Darksiders. You're working every day with these folks, interacting with these guys, and then you had the 100 and some odd, maybe heck, I can't even remember what the total. It might have been 130, 140 people on DMO, and then you make this drastic cut, and you cut 70 people from a project. Now, I wasn't involved with each one of those, but that was a shocking testament to, okay, then you go through and you've now incorporated another, 60 people on the project. So you're about 130 or so on Darksiders to push to that end. And so you're learning all these new people. We had people in the aisles, just set up, ready to working, bringing on this, pushing for that final stretch to get this on. Because again, the idea is like, hey, this will be one of those titles. If it comes out, maybe it, solidifies things and, and then to come out and then, several months later, say, oh, okay, now you've got to make your now there's, Dave's, hey man, nobody's buying Vigil, this is it. And you're making these cuts as you're going along, and you're seeing, comrades, friends, people that you would spend an enormous amount of time with, either, hey, I'm going to go work at another company, which is great to hear, or, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to do, here I'm packing up my stuff and I'll talk to you later, and you might not ever get to talk to those guys again. And I think that to me was very, sad. It's just a sad experience when you go through it. And I think the one thing that stuck with that was I always wanted to try to avoid having to do that if we ever had to do our own thing. And so that in my head, the back of my head, I was always like, these are people's lives that are committing to you and coming at you with families and all these other things and those experiences. And they had been out here, 6, 7, 8 years, hell, even a year, you're starting to get roots and you want to be there. And I think that to me was very just, it was just a sad, I don't know how else you would put it. And so from that perspective, seeing that and basically saying that was all out of our control. Yeah. And then Crytek sweeps in and, okay, it's like a life preserve, but you're making decisions on who can get in the life raft, right? Like who are we going to take? You can't take everybody because the project's they don't need 140 guys, And so from that perspective, you kind of evolve and say, okay, this is what you have to do, and try to, either find a home or help somebody else out with, hey, here's a LinkedIn, or here's something I can do for you, or whatever you can do from that perspective. And I think even from my level, and then looking at what Dave, was the decisions that were going on from him being at the, as the CEO of Vigil, it's certainly a different kind of role and responsibility, that a weight there, because all those guys a lot of those guys had gone through the DS1 experience as well. And to see and part ways with them was pretty difficult. So I think that to me, is you see your friend over there going through this and saying, hey man, this sucks. Obviously, we had some, discussions on what that would look like in moving forward, going into Crytek, and then with the hope that, okay, we've got a name brand company that's with us. Our past financial troubles will be behind, and we can hit the ground running with doing the things that we want to do, which is not the business side of those things and the ugliness, but creating cool products that people can have, the games that people can have fun with.
Yeah. Well, Dave, really props to you as well on even securing that life raft, because it doesn't come along all the time, right? Like so often people find themselves in icy waters, and you just fall under the surface. There isn't even a life raft to bring people into. But let's move forward now beyond this, because it wasn't long after, it was 2014, right, that you founded Gunfire Games. Am I correct? Right. Yeah. So then, tell me, this is what now it's like, if we include your first rinky dink little business cards and your trip to E3, this is like your third run at this. And especially with the perspective that I imagine working for, under THQ as a large parent company, and then going through that whole process, how did it steal you? And what was do you remember coming into Gunfire and the principles or the values or the spirit that you had going into it, and the things that you wanted from it?
I think for me personally, it was largely to just keep working with the same people I'd worked with, because we didn't leave Crytek by choice. It's not like we're like, hey, let's get out of here. Like, they have their own troubles, and by all accounts, they're in pretty good shape now. But they definitely had a little hiccup at that point in time that made it so we had to leave. But I think I had worked with a lot of these people a long time. Like, we all had kids at the same time. Like, I mean, I think a couple of our kids were born within like a month of each other. Like, wow. My daughter, who's now 12. So like, we'd worked together a long, long time. And, I think there was a sense too of like, hey, we want it to be under our own destiny, right? Because we went to Crytek. It wasn't really under our destiny. Like, we were just working for Crytek, and we were kind of like beholden to whatever they wanted to do or whatever their business decisions were. Yeah. And even with Vigil, like, I sold Vigil really early on to THQ. So, with Gunfire, it was like, hey, let's just do this ourselves. And like, we're not coming in to sell this thing right away. Like, we actually want to start and operate our own game company. Yeah. And I think at that point, like, we had enough of a reputation, because I think that one thing about game development is that it is the people, but it's also the combination of the people, right? You could get like 20 really great developers and stick them together, and they may not make anything good, because they don't work well together, or they have different tastes in games, or they like to make different stuff. But we definitely had an advantage, is that we had a core group of people that had worked together so long, and we were able to leverage that and go to people and say, hey, look, we know what we're doing. We work together. It's a known quantity. Like, we can make stuff. And so we were able to get work we bootstrapped it. We were able to get work pretty quick. We did some initial work for Amazon. And then Jason Rubin, who was actually my boss at the end at THQ, had just started at Oculus, and he's like, hey, give me a call. I was like, all right. Because they had just bought, I think they had just bought he worked at Facebook, but they just bought Oculus, right? Yeah. And then he's like, so we're doing this whole mobile heads. It's like back when you like clipped a phone in the headset.
Yeah, like in
thing.
the cardboard style.
Yeah, but it was all super top secret. Like, and he flew us to I guess it was San Francisco and to the Facebook office. I don't remember where he flew us. It wasn't the Facebook office yet at the time. Maybe the original Oculus office, wherever that was.
Their black site.
Yeah, and they showed us, and I was like, yeah, this is super cool. And he's like, hey, we just need developers to work on this stuff. And they were making some a game called Hero Bound, and initially they just needed someone to help them out with that.
Yeah,
it was funny because remember I got like a Samsung like 7 or whatever that wasn't out yet.
Yeah,
to try it, to take it home, and I like left it in a hotel, and I was freaking out because it was like, you know how people find like the leaked phones because someone left it in a bar or something like that. I was the guy. Like, I called cleaning, and they're like, we haven't seen a phone in there. I'm like, that's bullshit. There's a phone in that room. I got it back. But yeah, so we got lucky. You know, I mean, there was a certain amount of luck there because we had context, we knew people,
right?
And he worked with us. You know, he was there at the end of Darksiders II, and like. He would call me like every night because he'd be fighting a boss in Darksiders 2. He's like, this boss is bullshit. It's way too hard. I was like, I just kept telling him, like, I don't know, man. Maybe you just aren't good at these kinds of games anymore. And then there's a funny story about that because then we made Chronos, which is our first original IP on the web. And we had a similar thing where we were going to joke. We were going to make Ruben mode, which was like super easy mode because he had the same complaints about the bosses in Chronos. Hopefully he's listening to this. But anyway, he definitely could not play Remnant. Let me just throw that out there. But anyway.
No Ruben mode in Remnant,
but yeah, the Oculus friendship was really great for us. We did a lot of stuff with them. They were really great to work with, really nice. It was an amazing work with it. We enjoyed all our time with them. Absolutely. No complaints there. So
hell yeah.
We just wanted to stay together and keep working.
Tell me a little bit about Chronos. It's your first original game as a studio. You know, that must have been exciting, and how the development of that generally go. Seamless, had fun, or I will say that was like my most purely proud moment of game because we made that thing in 11 months. Wow,
which is crazy. Yeah, from like start to finish, which is crazy in and of itself.
Yeah.
And we somehow we pulled it off. I don't know how we did it, but if you go back and look at that game with the perspective that, hey, they made this game in 11 months on hardware that hadn't even come out yet. I think, it was a pretty impressive achievement. I'm super proud of how it turned out. And I think it was our first chance as a studio to make something. I love making original games. I don't really like work for hire. I'll be honest with you. We've done it a few times on things, but it's really not. I'm always like, let's just do something cool and new that we want to do.
Yeah. So I've spoken to a few people on the podcast now, you know, who've done obviously when we get together on the podcast, it's usually because you've had some like great hit, whether it's critically, commercially successful, usually a combination of all of those. But when I speak to some of these folks, they've done the previous work for hire thing the term that I've heard that I love is like escape velocity, essentially, right? It's like being able to like do enough to get yourself out of that like escape velocity. And so was it Jason and this VR opportunity that enabled you to do Chronos, your own original thing, or was it like leveraging some sort of like gaining enough cash on the margins of your?
Oh no, they definitely. They fully funded it. We did really good we did a really good job for them on Hero Bound. We ended up doing the sequel to Hero Bound 100% ourselves, and I think we go with gusto with anything we work on, even though Hero Bound wasn't our quote unquote IP. Like we put everything we could into it, made it as awesome as we could in the time frame. And so I think it was very easy for them to turn around and say, okay, well, now we're doing the standalone PC headset. You want to be one of the launch titles? We're like, yeah. All right, well, you got to make it 11 months. We're like, okay.
There's some requirements to that, right? Like 11 months, you can't get people sick, all these other kind of things.
So I think we showed it. Didn't we show it E3 like 3 months after we started, or 2 months or something crazy? Yeah. He's like, oh, you have a demo ready for E3? We're like, why not? Sign us up.
And at the time, they were giving very favorable deals to developers in terms of like, hey, create your own IP. You guys can own it too. And so that just adds value.
Yeah, that was huge.
So that was huge for us.
It's when, a platform needs content is always like the best time for developers, right? It's like the deals they come in thick and fast. It's wonderful.
Well, they were especially developer friendly. Being able to work on a project fully funded by a publisher and maintain IP rights is like pretty much
huge.
unheard of.
Yeah, I know. It's wild, isn't it? Well, yeah, congrats. That's the golden goose there. So but then there's obviously, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a few of these titles here. But you Dead and Buried, then you've got From Other Suns and stuff. But then Darksiders 3 comes in as well. So talk me quickly through how that one came back around to you. Like, did you secretly make a bid in the bankruptcy?
We did actually. We did. We did on behalf of Crytek, but it was like pathetic and THQ Nordic. Well, at the time, I guess Nordic won the bid by a mile, like by a country mile, pretty much. Yeah. Well, that's funny because there's this guy Reinhard Police, and he worked at Nordic, and he had been contacting me since way back at Crytek, and he was always just like sniff around. Like it started out like, "Hey, you got any Darksiders assets? Because we bought the IP. You guys interested in work?" And I was like, "Nah, I don't want to work on Darksiders. We're doing our own thing. We're doing our own thing." And he is literally the most persistent human being on earth. Like I think he just wore me down. Like eventually, it's like, all right, we'll do Darksiders 3, right? It was just like, I mean, it's like his superpower. He's just like so persistent. You eventually just give in and say, "Fine, we'll do it." What do you want me to do? And that's literally how. I mean, I can't think of. That's literally how it happened, to be honest.
Amazing.
It's not like I didn't want to work on Darksiders, but I'm always just more interested in doing something new, and But so we did Darksiders 3. We did it really cheap. We did it for like $10 million or less than $10 million.
Wow,
which is like,
for that scale.
Which is insane considering Darksiders 2 was like $30 million. So that's the budget they had, but we made it work. Like we're like, all right, what Darksiders game can we make for $9 million or whatever it was?
Amazing.
And we did our best.
So Ben, talk to me a little bit about you're at Gunfire at this time as well, I imagine, right?
We co-started it at that point, and so
great.
Yeah, I think Dave hit the nail on the head. We did the Amazon stuff, then went into the Oculus Facebook universe, and really came out with Chronos, came out with Other Suns. A lot of people think we own the Hero Bound license, which we don't. That's Oculus's guys, but that really kind of set us up for that next level. And then to Dave's point, Reinhardt would always just be like, "Hey, we're at this event. Oh, here's Reinhardt. Hey, Reinhardt, we're going to go to lunch." All right, cool. He became like, pseudo part of the team, he's, contacting us and, all the, and just staying in contact with that. And then obviously Darksiders and creating that's near and dear to Dave's heart. So, from that perspective, it wasn't a huge sale to say, "Hey, I'd love to jump back into that franchise and see what we can do." Now, I think the budget was probably the hardest thing to kind of swallow because you're used to doing something different from that perspective.
So that's what, like, because I'm keen to get onto Remnant. So the only real question I'm going to ask around Darksiders before we then move on to Remnant, and obviously all the amazing story, no doubt, that's going to come out of that, is you got a third of the amount to make the game, Ben. Like, tell me immediately how you went about solving that problem. As someone who's been given, I started my career making games that only had a third of the budget that they should have had, right? Like, how did you go about that? What's, that immediate sort of like problem in front of you? And I guess like there's always a thing too, to add a little addendum to that, is like from constraint, obviously great creativity comes as well. So in what ways did it assist and benefit the project, or did great things come from it?
I think I'll go back to the Chronos just to show you, because in 11 months, Oculus said we need it for a launch title and we need to be able to do it here. And I think for us with the Darksiders 3 stuff is, hey, it's got to be here, and this is where we want to be at. And I think we were able to navigate those waters and how our existing team was, the scope of the project, and really being a little bit of pragmatic and realistic on what we could do at the time. And that's where we started, saying, hey, we're not out to just kill everybody and hire a whole bunch of temp people that we can just, fire at the end of the project and stuff. We really wanted to avoid that kind of scenario, like I said, because I felt like, hey, we can't just bring people on and just cut them loose at the end. It just didn't seem right or didn't sit well. And I think to Dave, as the creative director on that one, hey, here's what we got. We got 6 guys, man. What do you think we can get done? And then the buy-in from the team, trying to involve those guys and making that decision and say, hey, guys, I remember certainly in several of those meetings, hey, we're going to go in and we're going to do this. Is everybody's on board, right? And everybody was like, yeah, we're ready. Okay, cool. Then it would just execute and we would just get it done. And I think from that perspective, that's how we were able to navigate those waters with the DS3, scope versus what was delivered.
And did it sort of, was it hard? Games are notoriously hard to put in a box at the end, right? was it hard to make it sort of work with that 10 mil, or did you? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like
we wanted more time at the end of the end of the day. We would have loved to have more time to be able to polish some things and change some things up at the end of the day. I think that was probably our biggest regret for that title, is that we just weren't given the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
I think there's a delta between what you could do and what even you would expect as a consumer, right? Because we make it like having made Darksiders 2 for 30 million and then have to make the sequel for that for 1/3 of that. Like, you already know, like, this game isn't going to be like, just honestly, it's just not going to be as good as Darksiders 2.
Yeah.
So then but it doesn't help when it comes out and everybody's like, this game's not as good as Darksiders 2. You're like, it still hurts. But it's literally impossible.
Yeah. No.
And then, you're selling it at full price, and it's like people compare it to like a game like God of War 2018. I'm pretty sure like 2 other cutscenes cost more than our entire game
the whole budget.
To make. And it's just like, you got to be proud for what you did with what you're given, but at the same time, it was a hard experience, I think. Because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so and I came from Darksiders 1 and 2, where I just like, we're going to do this, hell or high water, I don't care. We're just going to do it to like, well, I guess we can't do that. No, I guess we can't do that. Well, let's do this instead. And happen to be a lot more practical and like strategic about what you actually put into the game so you can get it done.
Yeah.
But again, I think that everybody worked hard on that title. It wasn't there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and there's a lot of cool stuff that generated from that. And, there's a lot of, good things that came from Fury's development, the whole storyline, a lot of that. So I think from that perspective, even though, again, that's why we were hoping just to get some more time, just to be able to polish some of those rougher edges on that particular title.
Yeah, it's that compromise as well when you're coming to the end, and it's always we're about to close 2 of our games in the next 6 to 9 months. We've got 2 in development, and you're watching the team like go through that realization moment that feature isn't going to come in as complete as they had hoped, or that thing is going to get cut and everything. It's always it's video games, right? It's the putting it in the box part, but it's, there are some projects where it definitely hurts more than others, no doubt. So let's do it. Let's talk about Remnant. That's the reason why we're here. So, right, like you've obviously got this amazing story, and like this, again, keeping the band together for so long and making a real point of it too, and now you've got this team here, and again, your own IP, your own concept, like, tell me about how that came about, Dave. Did you have someone from Perfect World on the phone, like, or did you have enough kitty laying around to sort of kick off something on the side and pitch it around? How did it come to be, Remnant?
I think that like the idea of the game preceded the IP, because I had always wanted to make a game that was like randomly generated, as far as like mainly because I just like, I can't play games more than once. So I was like, hey, can I make a game that I would actually want to play more than once? And then I think at some point we were just like, hey, we got this Kronos IP and we could reuse some of those assets. Like, why don't we set it in the quote unquote Kronos universe? But prior to that, it was its own universe and its own IP, and we'd even done a bunch of concept for it. So switching it to that same IP was actually kind of late in the game. But I think the core of the game, like third-person shooter, randomized worlds, it was a little bit more of a survival game at first, where you're like eating food and shit. So some of that stuff didn't make it into the final game, but the core DNA of like this cool, randomly and infinitely repeatable adventure game was there
with
all
co-op,
along.
because we like co-op. We wanted to make a multiplayer game.
Yeah, and if you look at it, a game we worked on, From Other Suns, has a lot of the elements in Remnant. Like, so we were building towards this from the very beginning. Like, we had this idea that like, hey, every game we make is going to be some technical stepping stone to this final game. There were elements of Darksiders 3 like that we fleshed out as far as character movement and making bosses and stuff like that go into Remnant. There's stuff from Other Suns with the random map generation and stuff that went into Remnant. There's stuff from Kronos that, stuff that we did, initial groundwork stuff for the technology that went into it. All fed back into the same game we wanted to make at the end of the day. So we had kind of been making it all. And in fact, I believe we were pretty far along, even during Darksiders 3. Like, we had a lot of stuff for Remnant done. It wasn't called Remnant at the time, but while we were working on Darksiders 3, and we were pitching it around to like a bunch of different publishers. And just ultimately, Perfect World was the partner we decided to go with. They gave us the best deal. We liked them.
Gave us the best deal.
And that we're off to the races after that.
And so how long was development on Remnant I? Had you know, obviously you have a certain amount of time when you start this thing, you get a budget, you have a certain amount of money. How sort of elastic was that, or how did that compare to where you ended up shipping the game and how much time and stuff you had?
I don't remember. I mean, we bootstrapped a lot of it ourselves, and then
so we.
I don't remember how much time it was after we signed with Perfect World, though. To be honest with you,
right?
I want to say it was a couple years. I think the whole total time. I mean, it's really hard because again, we were creating games that were building on that technology for Remnant II, but I would say that it was probably a 36-month cycle. Mm-hmm. I can't remember where Perfect World came in on that because we had a lot of assets already ready, so that helped leverage the deal more in our favor in terms of a residual. And how that all, and again, as a startup company, that helps out in terms of where we want to be at in terms of how that all looks. And so that was kind of the idea as we were working through and starting that partnership with them and doing milestone reviews. And that was new to us because, we did our own things and now we're talking to a publisher.
Oculus is very much just tell us when
Oculus,
the game's done.
Game's done, dude. It looks great. So we're like, wow, we love this relationship. This is the best relationship ever with the publisher dev ever. And so we've sort of cultivated that same relationship with the Perfect World guys who are now the Gearbox guys. And so that was really favorable in terms of like that just meshing well and that trust, establishing pretty quickly. And then, so that, again, I think it was like 36, it was probably a 36-month dev cycle. If I'm not mistaken.
Excuse my ignorance here, but like when you say the Perfect World guys became the Gearbox guys, was that through a company? Are you talking specific people, or was there a merger?
No, Perfect World got acquired by Gearbox.
Right.
But so they became, it was owned by Embracer, who also owns THQ. Who owns
yes.
Okay, cool. It gets all complicated at the end of the day. All the moving people.
Pure coincidence too.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It was very fun. It seemed like everybody we were working with at some point in time got acquired by Embracer.
Yeah,
just like okay.
That's for sure.
We had we worked with this company called Metric Minds, and the same they did a lot of our cutscenes, and so they got acquired by so it was just interesting to see that development and that now they're part of the Embracer group kind of element.
Yeah. Now we were talking as well in regards to Darksiders III and some of your other games about putting something in a box and the things that the compromises that you have to make or the things that you have to let go. And one of the most incredible things about Remnant II and the reception to it, like if you watch obviously you guys have, right? But like the IGN review, like the video review of Remnant II is like, this, the reviewer is obsessed with your game. Like it's so incredible. And one of the things that they talk about is, and this is a constant across even your user reviews and everything, is how much Remnant II sort of builds upon and so successfully builds upon the concepts of Remnant I, and even those areas in which Remnant I may have not have come together or been fully formed or hit as much as it could have. For you internally, as you're closing out Remnant I and you're moving into Remnant II, like what was it that you knew that you wanted to tackle? What were the parts you were like, that you had to compromise on that you knew you wanted to dive into for Remnant II?
I'll be honest with you. Like when we first started Remnant II, we were just like, hey, let's just do more Remnant I.
That's awesome.
And I think
make it a quicker turn.
A lot of the stuff we ended up, obviously, a lot of stuff we ended up adding were natural progressions of things we had already did. Like, we added the archetype system to just give players sort of because we always had debates on Remnant 1 is like, oh, should you have a class? Should you not have a class? Like, what's a way of doing classes in a Remnant friendly way? Yeah. And that became the archetype system. And then for the quest system, like we just wanted more, bigger and more. Like we wanted more interesting side quests. We wanted more side quests. We did a thing in Remnant 2 where we randomized the story biomes because, as much as we always claimed, hey, the game's different every time you play, that wasn't totally true in Remnant 1 because every time you went to Earth, you always rescued the root mother in the church and you always met the keeper at the tower that appeared in the middle of the city. So we're like, hey, what if even that was randomized? But beyond that, it was really just like, hey, let's take everything we did and just do it better. Cleaner, bigger. Better polish, make it look better lighting, characters look better. So I think that was a big emphasis for Remnant 2. We always joked, it's like, oh, when it started, it was going to be like Remnant 1.5. But I think that didn't, and by that, we didn't mean, we'll just like crank out another game using the same
No,
stuff.
you
It
were
was
just
more
happy with what you had before, right? And
yeah, it was more like, hey, let's not go crazy with the sequel, because like Darksiders 2, we were just like, screw it, let's just do something completely different with Diablo style loot and a different main character, blah blah blah, and all these dumb decisions. Which I don't know, maybe they weren't dumb, but with Remnant II, we're like, all right, we're not going to do that. We're just going to take what we have and just like build up onto it and make it better. And I think that like, yeah, I always tell people, like, I feel like we pretty much got everything in the game we wanted to. Like, I don't think there was a lot of thing in Remnant II where we're like, oh man, I wish you could have got this done. I mean, there might have been a few things here and there, but like pretty much everything we set out to do, we did.
Yeah.
And then some, a little extra that we threw in at late moments that stressed Ben out. Like, hey, we should do injectables. We'll do 9 injectables and never buy them.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So Ben, let's you're the development director on Remnant II.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the development of Remnant II versus Remnant I off the back of what Dave's saying. You said you had 36 months. You're obviously it was a new IP at the start with Remnant I, and then obviously you pulled in the Chronos world and everything. But like these building off the tech that you had over those years, but it is still like the first game in a series, right? But now you're on the lucrative first sequel that all of the big studios and publishers are looking to get at. Tell me how the development differed. It sounds like it was more just bigger, better, more, but were there things that came along that posed challenges, or was it this beautiful moment where you're like, we've got the game, let's just add to it, let's just keep going, like Dave says?
I think I think there's always a it's interesting. Development is always interesting. You can't schedule creativity, and so you've got to it's not like I can sit there, oh Dave, be creative now, let's go. But there were many lunch conversations, different things that just, as we started talking about the initial, like, hey, we're ready to do Remnant 2. What does that look like? Hey, Remnant 1.5, we've got some of these assets. Let's make it a little bigger. We can do this. We can upgrade this to this. And I think people just started, this is the organic nature of how the project's kind of, the scope and the project starts working. And the favorable aspect of working with Perfect World / Gearbox now in terms of our relationship with them. And I think when we first started talking about it, and, when Dave came up with the idea of, hey, what if we did, instead of one main story arc like we did before, what if we did it like, more siloed off, where each biome could have its own story and kind of wrap it up, but we still have this main arc. And I'm like, all right, cool, man, let's throw some numbers together. Let's talk to the guys and see if we get some buy-in in terms of, do we think we got the staff for this? What does it look like? It's very much more analytical, because, you just got time. The thing that I can't make 24 hours more than 24 hours. You can add people, but you can't make more time. And so when we were looking at it, I think, the challenges are always in, like, hey, when Dave throws out, like, injectables was probably one of the bigger ones, where they're these individual, like, POI things, and you're already sitting there like, okay, one of my favorite things to do is figure out ways to make that work. Like, it's a great idea. I'm all on. Let's figure out, how do we make that work? What do we need to do? Do we need extra guys? Do we need a little bit more time? How can we structure it to where we can actually, can we use something to where we can just modify it a little bit and get some savings there? And so I think from that perspective, that was the sort of the juggling along the directive. And then throughout every title, there's major, flare ups and, oh my goodness, this isn't working. And then this is working. This isn't working. Or the cutscenes aren't coming in on time. Or, we have to re-record some VO because this is, and I think learning in those processes. And again, the team really is, I always feel like, throughout our history, at least, we've always punched above our weight in terms of what we deliver. And how many people work on a title for us, individually. And so where Remnant II was one of our bigger titles, it still is, for what we deliver and the budget we have and the people always overshoot what we're always shooting for. And I think that's a testament to the strength of the team. And so I think from that perspective, everybody got excited about, hey, this is looking cool. This is looking fun. I want to be a part of that, and I'm going to push it. I'm going to push it a little bit more in terms of what we can give and what we can get out of the engine. Moving from 4 to 5, Unreal 4 to 5, giving us a little bit, especially late in the project. Giving us some more bells and whistles to tweak with and mess with. And so I think from that perspective, those are those huge, like, hey, okay, we're going to do it, right? Everybody's on board, right? Okay, if we do this, we got to be ready. And then again, having a partner like Perfect World being able to say, we believe in your vision.
Yeah.
You guys need, because we had come and we had said, hey, I think we're shaping up, and we were able to kind of look at the velocity and how we were going. I'm like, I think we need, like, probably 120 more days, just to be able to get a little bit more polished in there, to be able to have that. And them guys look and say, hey, yeah, man, that sounds like a good deal. Here's where we'll change this. We'll bump this a little bit. And so I think all those things help create the title that you get at the end, which is where Remnant II, where we started, where we always think we're going to start, and then where we finally end up at, and then everybody's really proud about that, even though there might have been some hair pulling and some anger and some frustrations and stuff like that, like, oh, why can't you do this, or why can't you just understand we can't do this? But then it kind of works its way out once you're in the thick of things, and you're like, hey, I see everybody rowing in a direction, and we're all trying to give it our all.
Yeah, I think it's pretty humbling just to see everybody working so hard, and there's so many people that care about what they're doing. And I mean, you lose sight of that sometimes when you're busy or like giving feedback or trying to get stuff done. But yeah, I think that there were a lot of people on the team that really, really cared about the game and put a lot of effort into Remnant II to make it awesome.
I don't think there's anything in video games, like in my time making games, like it's the moments that I always am having the most fun and that I like always am like the most buzzed about working in games is never like those pie in the sky creative like blank canvas moments or anything like that. It's like when you're in it with the team and everyone around you is just like singularly focused and like working like a well-oiled machine. And like you say, Dave, you can just see, like visibly see how much people care about the project and how much they're putting into it. And sort of like moving as one, so to speak, when you're coming into a milestone or closing out a game or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I have to concur. I think that for our team, seeing those kind of those rewards and bringing, somebody who was younger and giving them more opportunities than they would necessarily get in a larger studio, and seeing that blossom and them take on those responsibilities and just knock them out of the park is just a rewarding experience. And I think that with Remnant II, we were able to, shoot for this again. We started here, and I believe that we're pretty realistic with what we can do, but I think that we always have that, hey, there's probably 20% more in the gas tank we could probably floor and do it without having to kill everybody. Because again, we're older. We've learned a lot of things. The culture of gaming in general is becoming more mature. So, things that you were doing, 10, 15 years back, you don't necessarily need to do anymore, or you can figure that out. And then you hit COVID, which we didn't even talk about. And so when you're all of a sudden restricted for work from home, and now we're shipping a game, we're trying to work from home. And a lot of that changed up how we thought about, hey, what can we do when we're working from home? How do we change that communication now that we're not all in the studio? How does that organic creativity still happen? Because I'm not next to you, and we're not referencing the latest thing that happened or playing the latest video game and talking about it and saying, hey man, did you see this? Oh man, I read this, or I saw this. What do we think about that or that? And so being able to still have those kind of connect points was very challenging for us. And I'm sure for a lot of studios. And I think that, from that perspective, overcoming that and understanding that, hey, it's a different mindset for us because we're still fully remote. We don't require anybody to come to the office unless they want to, or certain roles that have to, like IT can't work on a server if they're not there, stuff like that, or QA if they're working on a console or something. But I think overall in general, that was another, hey, let's just keep rolling weird dice, through that last, couple years of stuff that's happening. Okay, cool. We're going through these, tumultuous times here in the United States, and then you get a crazy pandemic that nobody's ever been a part of, and you just sit here and you go, okay, how do we still try to launch something and something that can happen with all these other stressors that are going on in people's lives, and still try to say, hey, I need you to focus and work when, you're having this mental fatigue of everything that's just like coming on you. So I think from that perspective, again, the team was able to to respond to that and be able to cultivate that. And it's, the results are right there when you're playing the game. You can see that a lot of people cared about what they were doing there.
Because am I right in saying you would have been basically shipping Remnant I right in the height of the pandemic, around about that time? Were you closing it out?
We closed out.
No, that was before the pandemic. Yeah, that was 2019. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So 2021, 22.
It really made Remnant II.
Yeah, because Remnant II was a little bit more. It was about 42 months worth of development time.
Yeah. How many folks around that point in time, Remnant II mid-development, how many folks on the team are we talking on the game?
Right around probably 70.
Yeah. Okay.
70, 75.
Yeah, it just we had a title in development, about 50 people. We were in pre-production when it hit in Australia, and in Melbourne we had the lockdowns, and it just bodied us. It's amazing how much like at the start there, development slows down, and like you say, this unprecedented thing. We're making video games. There are other industries that, and government organizations that are dealing with much more, but still, like like you say, figuring out those connect points. Dave, how did it feel for you? So much of your studio and your history and like, what sounds like is the core fabric of what makes your games. And, Gunfire Games 2 is you and your pals, and these folks that you've worked with for decades. And now all of a sudden you're working from home. How much of that, how did it feel sort of watching that culture transform? And what did you feel that you had to do in order to protect that or retain that sort of synergy that Ben's talking about? And what just was there already? And
I think I would say one of the less desirable aspects of it is that like I don't feel like I know, especially the newer people, near as well as I used to. Right? I mean, there was a time where like I pretty well knew everybody in the office to an extent. And now we'll have team meetings and I'll be like, who's that? And it's not because we have a ton of, we're bigger too, which is part of it, but also just because you literally don't see them or they live in a different state. Like
you don't have those in between moments now as well with remote work,
exactly.
Right? It's like you interact with the people that you are in meetings. It's very transactional now as opposed to walking past someone at the coffee machine or something.
So that's definitely something that's lost. I think that the advantage of the people that I have worked with for so long is that it did make it a lot easier to work from home because we just know each other so well,
of course.
Yep. I don't really, I miss hanging out with them and I miss the camaraderie, but I would say that we're able to work pretty well together still because we know all each other. They probably know all my quirks and all that. Like they probably know what I'm going to say before I say it. So I don't think there's, it definitely helps in that respect. And I think a lot of the leadership in the studio are all people that have worked together a long time. And I think that was able to carry us through quite a bit. I can't imagine a team that wasn't familiar with each other having to go through the pandemic situation. That would have been a nightmare. But like you said, it was a big shock. Like at first it's crazy. Wild, right? People were dealing with kids at home and all kinds of crazy stuff they had to take care of and try to work at the same time. But we pulled it off. We got it done somehow.
Incredible stuff. So let's I'm really interested as well to just hear about, talking about Remnant I and when it came out, like the reception, from the community as well. Obviously huge success. And was there something, Dave, that resonated for you with the community response? Like, was it where, and it's funny when these things happen, like when you have a game that's successful, because it can be successful for the reasons that you think. And, the concept that you had can sort of like, you can be vindicated when it comes out and be like, oh yeah, great. And sometimes it can be like, there are areas of the game or reasons why people enjoy your game, or even the way in which they enjoy it that can surprise you. Was there anything from the community and the response that, you sort of steeled with you or took into Remnant II that, surprised you or that really stood out for you?
I think that surprised me. That's a good one. That's a good question. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the stuff we saw as important in the game were things that really picked up. I mean, for me personally, like in game development, like the core mechanics are really, really, really important. Like if it's a shooter game, you gotta be able to shoot and it feels good. Right. And I think, so it was obviously vindicating to have people say, oh man, like, even in the reviews, like the guns feel really good in this game. Because like, if the guns don't feel good in that game, that game's garbage because it's a shooting game. And I think that like, the randomization of the world was a huge risk because honestly, in Remnant II, it's even a bigger risk when you think about it. Because at the end of the day, we made twice as big of a game and then someone's going to play through on the first playthrough, or maybe even bigger than twice as big of a game. And we've hired people and I've been like, we made quests that people may literally not even roll in their world. And they're like, that's madness. Like, who would even do that? And so there was some doubt as, hey, would that be appreciated? I didn't think people would think badly of it. But my worry was like, are they even going to care? Like we did all this effort and they're going to play it once and be like, that was a fun game, move on. And if that's what happened,
is it just literally like a waste of money as well?
Yeah, and we just waste our time doing it. But no, like people would like, they would, they go out on Reddit and say, hey, I'm looking for this quest. Do you have this quest? Or I have this quest, rolled my roll. Do you want to jump in? And so, people's desire to collect all the little bits and bobs in the game, and that tied in very well with the random quest system. It was really cool to see that sort of community build up around that. You'll even see it now with Reddit too, where like, I'm doing an apocalypse run, or I'm trying to get this, or I'm trying to do that. And people trying to like just get together to jump in other people's worlds to get content that's not in their world and that kind of stuff. So plus just, I think it really worked out well with, especially in an age of streaming, right? Because you could watch the game and you'd be watching it on two different streams, and like, especially with Remnant II, like two completely different things could be happening. Like, that guy's in a sci-fi world and that guy's in a fantasy world. So I think it felt cool to see that, like, hey, maybe this wasn't wasted. Like, people actually do seem to appreciate this and enjoy this aspect of the game. So
you raise a great point that honestly, it hadn't clicked with me. I haven't played Remnant multiplayer. I played it single player, and it for a co-op game as well. Like it's so solid single player as well, and all the time that I got out of it there too. But it's like the interesting thing that hadn't clicked for me, what you just said, is like that collectible aspect that is, because if it was just a purely single player game, then what you're saying, Dave, may have come to fruition, where it is like, it is just a waste that those folks, they have to restart a whole new campaign or whatever to get that quest. But the fact that you can collect these quests or jump in and experience other people's worlds or what they've rolled through co-op is beautiful. Was that a happy accident, or was that something that you intended from the start?
I think that the sense that, well, it's funny because me and Ben were playing, was it Dark Souls 2? There was Bloodborne. It was Bloodborne, right?
Bloodborne, yeah.
And, even Bloodborne, which is a game that's completely static, everything's exactly the same.
Yeah.
There's stuff in that game that might happen to me and that might not happen to you, right?
Yeah.
And I remember we were like talking to each other on the phone and playing. And he's like, dude, some guy just like put me in a sack and took me to a castle. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? And there's this dude that just like kicks you and you think you die and he like puts you in a sack. And I think we were working on Remnant at the time. I can't remember, but I think that idea that like, hey, you could be playing with friends or talking with friends, and they could be experiencing something completely different to you.
Yeah,
was cool, and I think that it definitely was part of the reason why we did it, right? So that you could be playing the game like, I'm fighting some weird giant guy with spikes in his back. Like, I don't know, I got a wizard that shoots arrows down on me, and even though you're at the same spot in the game, I think was an important, and also how that would tie into, well, I guess water cooler moments don't even happen anymore because no one's stuck. But we talked about like just coming to work and bullshitting about the game, because that was relevant in Remnant I because we still came to work, and like having completely different experiences and how that. So that's kind of how we thought about it in our mentality. Yeah. But I think I guess I never pictured the online aspect of like people going on message boards saying, hey, I have this quest, you want to come in and jump? I guess that was a bit of a happy action. Like, oh yeah, cool. I guess people would do that. I thought more in terms of friends, because I always played multiplayer with friends, right? Like with Ben or somebody else, but seeing communities kind of revolve around that, where people are like taking through each other through areas, or we had a really big secret in Remnant II, and people were like, hey, I'll take you through the steps to get to the secret, join my game. That's awesome. That's really cool to see that higher level community aspect of it.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like, you mentioned, obviously Remnant has, it's like Dark Souls with guns was obviously the thing that a lot of people said at the start. So there's a lot of comparables there for the Souls-like games, or the Souls games, I should say. But that emergent gameplay that you see from the Souls games, obviously was all over Elden Ring, with like, let me solo her and things like that, right? But then
sure.
It's really amazing to see that stuff come through in Remnant as well. One thing that I'm really keen to ask you here, Dave, as well, for the developers on the listening to the podcast too, is obviously procedural generation has been like something that you've been interested in for a long time, and something that it's in Remnant 2. It's just an astounding achievement. It's one of like, and it feels like the holy grail of this is I'm being very hyperbolic and I'm giving you a lot of credit here, but like it feels like the holy grail of procedural generation in a sense, in that you could play the game and some people may not, obviously they would know if they go back through and everything, but like it feels orphaned, like it's so successfully done, and the different biomes that can, when you look at them, they could be completely different games as well, a sci-fi game, fantasy game. With the point that you're at now, having done this procedural generation through Remnant I, Remnant II, and previous titles, what do you feel is like the key to successfully doing procedural generation in a game? I know it's a big question, but like when you think about it from a real high level, what do you think it is that makes Remnant II such a success with its procedural generation? That
I think that like for our game specifically, I mean, I kind of, it's funny, people say procedural, but procedural generation in my head's like No Man's Sky, right? Like it's truly procedural.
Yeah.
I always imagine Remnant as like, here's a bunch of cool game ideas and someone shut like a deck of cards and someone shuffled the deck of cards and laid a hand out, and that's what you got. And because everything in Remnant is handcrafted, right? Like every boss is handcrafted, every point of interest is handcrafted, every NPC is handcrafted. It actually isn't. It's like a bunch of individually non-procedurally elements randomly combined together. Yeah. And I think for us, that's more interesting to me. Like I like procedural games, but they can tend to be very generic and repetitive because you get a lot of random variation, but nothing very interesting. Like you really need that handcrafted human touch to make something interesting. And so that's really what Remnant's based on. And it's funny because it goes back. We used to play this game called Warm Request. It was like an old fantasy, another Games Workshop game. But like you'd lay out these random tiles, right? And then there was like this event deck of cards, and so you pull it over once, and it's like, oh, there's an old dwarven prospector in the corner, and it's like, do you give him 10 gold? And you're like, sure, I'll give him 10 gold. Oh, he gives you a rusty key, and then you go in a room, there's a chest, you unlock the rusty key. And when we were like 13, we're like, this is amazing. This is like, it's different every time, but not really. I mean, you're going to get a certain number of events in the deck. But I think Remnant really, for me personally in my head, is it's from playing Warm Request back in the day and going like, I want a game like that on the computer where there's a bunch of cool random things that can happen to me, and it changes and randomizes what happens in what order. So I don't know if that answered your question. No, I guess the shorter answer is it's not really like truly procedural. It really is like a shuffling of a bunch of cool handcrafted content.
Yeah, and I mentioned this, this concept of like the holy grail of procedural generation. I guess it depends, if we're talking from an engineering perspective, like, yeah, you're right, it's fully procedural. But if we're talking from a player's perspective, that like, that handcrafted elements like well shuffled in a deck and then presented to you in a seamless fashion where it doesn't feel like, the man is still behind the curtain, it's like, it doesn't feel like it's being revealed to you. It feels like Remnant does that really well. Ben, tell me about the challenges of the procedural generation. Tell me about the things that didn't come together, or the big, and especially like I know you mentioned injectables or things like that, like Remnant I and Remnant II. What did it take to make the success happen, on the ground floor?
Well, I think, again, you go back to what Dave was saying, is trying to stay within that creative vision of how do we make that happen? How do we, get these water cooler moments or whatever the new term is now with with wherever we're at, whatever that moment is where you can say, I think that the cool part was, watching two streamers and they're playing two different games, but that's all Remnant 2. And people are like, I've never seen the Ravager. I've never seen this dog thing, or that's out there, this wolf idea, or what's going on with this deer, or where that. And that buzz about that was really, really interesting. I think from the development side and working through with the people, is that it was really, once we started seeing how that was coming together, I think was really, doing playthroughs and walking through the environments and seeing how it could start shaping up and getting onto our next biome and the things we learned from the first biome. And it's starting to, the team picking up speed just because, okay, we understand now what collectively we need to do to make this happen. And then coming up with those ideas and saying, this is going to be cool. The archetype system coming online to enhance, the moment to moment gameplay and giving people that, the fantasy aspect of now, you've got, crazy weapons that are doing, super cool stuff. And, I think that all those things juggled together, coming together like, as a fruit salad kind of thing, to something very, very, enjoyable that you would enjoy. And I think, again, that's a testament to the group of people that we have working for us. I can't say that enough in these interviews.
How do you yeah, right. Of course. Yeah. How do you even test for something like that, Ben? Do you develop it with a mind for the fact that it's going to be an absolute shitstorm when it all comes together, and you put constraints in during development to help guide you? Or is it, or do you just try to like launch yourself into it head first when you get to that point?
I think, if you're going to test for something, you need to give somebody like, what's the expectations of what the results of what we're going to see and these permutations. And so you can say, hey, give me a way to just look at the POI, so you can spawn a POI or spawn something and look at it in a vacuum and then put it together. And now let me see how that plays. And there's so many different avenues. You just need cycles to play through it. You just need time to play through it. And, you can continue. And that's, as much QA as we did, which was far more than we've ever done on any other projects. Once you release that and millions of people are playing that and going through those experiences, you can say, oh, wow, I had no idea that could happen, or nobody's even thought of that before. And wow, who would have So I think from that perspective, there's not like a game plan outside of just the cycles you need to just be able to test something where there's so many random elements that can, change the parameters of what you're expecting, from that perspective. Plus making sure that it's polished enough that, you don't have, I'm not walking along and I just fall through the floor, a quest rolls or any of these other kind of just low level, hanging fruit kind of things. But overall, in general, I think, from our group is like, hey, get in there, play the game, having the team play the game, experiencing it, and that really starts people getting excited about, hey, I played the game and this was super exciting. We had one of our tech director was like, man, I played this with my son and it was badass. And I'm like, yeah, exactly, this is cool. Like that. Those are the kind of moments that just jazz you in terms of like, motivate you to continue moving forward, even though
them, right?
That's right, exactly. And again, it's limited because you're not in the studio talking about it every day, and you have like Teams or Zooms or whatever method you're trying to communicate. But overall, I think from our perspective, it's, hey, this is what's in the game. Try to test for this. This is how we want to try to mitigate that. And they do as best as they can from however many people we have.
Dave, another huge achievement for Remnant II is the boss fights. It's just astounding, like how great some of them are. And like you say, you've got a long history with boss fights with Darksiders and stuff like that. When you set out with Remnant II after Remnant I and all of your experience, sort of in these boss fights are a mainstay of video games, and you talk about the importance of mechanics. Obviously, you got the shooting down, it feels good. The looting feels good. What was it in Remnant 2 that you really focused on to bring those boss fights home and to have them, obviously have the reception that they've had?
I think one thing that's really important for me is that a boss fight's memorable. Like that, there's some element of it that's interesting or unique enough that you could remember about it when you walk away. Now, do you do that 100% of the time? No. Sometimes a boss fight's not always going to leave a lasting impression, but I think if you do that more often than not, then you're in pretty good shape. I will say, like, Remnant 2 is like the first game I've ever worked on where I actually didn't really do any boss. I used to implement like a lot. I think I did a lot of the bosses in Darksiders or Remnant 1.
Right.
I did almost all of them in Darksiders 1. Quite a few in Darksiders 2. Almost all of them in Darksiders 3. So, like, I've done a lot of bosses in my career, which is good because I'm probably running out of ideas, to be honest.
You really get a new group of people.
Has a limited number of bosses, so I think that I think I worked on one boss partially in Darksiders Remnant 2, but we had a lot of really good guys that stepped up to the plate and brought a bunch of cool, new, fresh ideas, which I think is really useful. Fresh, new ideas are extremely valuable in game development, and I think that you always have the advantage with the sequel where it's like, it's really hard when you have an original IP to explain to people what the game's about, right? Because and it's funny, you'll get right up to you'd be like shipping the game, and half the team's like, I don't even know what this game's about, because everyone's working on their own little silo. Yeah, but you don't have that problem with the sequel, right? So people come in and they played Remnant 1, and they're like, I want to do a cool boss fight that does this, or I like this from Remnant 1, I didn't want to do something like that. And so that synergy really builds upon itself, and then you inject a bunch of new blood in there with some cool new ideas. And I think, overall, I think I was really proud of just the variety of the boss fights in Remnant 2. Like, I'll put variety in our boss fights up against any game any day. Like, we got some crazy ass shit, like big flying dragon butterfly guys and like weird interstellar beings.
I think it's good because, like
there's
Dave
a giant
says,
cube that smashes
fresh new ideas. Dave comes up with like maybe like to the cube point. Hey man, what if we fought a rolling dice boss? And I'm like, fuck it, okay, let's think about how that is. And then you take a guy who say, hey man, what do you think? And you start the collaboration, and that's the cool part to see, right? Because you have this new talent level coming up with fresh ideas that we would have never thought of implementing ever in 1,000 years. And you're like, fuck, that's pretty fucking cool, man. A lot of people like it. So I think that you have to stay fresh. You have to be accepting to these new ideas and say, hey, this is cool, and a lot of people are going to like this. And it's different than what my comfort zone is, and being able to like come out of your comfort zone, especially from a creative standpoint, and saying, hey, that I can recognize the cool elements of that. And let's tamper that down a little bit. Let's change that up a little bit. But it's fine tuning. It's not the larger scope of making that happen to where you can say, hey, and we can grow as a studio from that perspective.
Well, what a perfect segue! Fresh new ideas and growing as a studio, and the new generation of like talented crew at Gunfire and stuff. Dave? What's next for Remnant? What's next for Remnant II? What's next for Gunfire? What do you got your eyes on?
Well, next for Remnant 2 is some DLC that we're working on. So I think we just announced one, The Awakened King. So that's coming out on the 14th. But we still got a lot more Remnant 2 in our back pocket that we're working on. And I guess the rest I can't really talk about. But
no doubt. We are not the Hot Scoops podcast, so we can forgive you. Absolutely.
But plenty of more Remnant 2. We're committed to continue to work on the game, and as long as people still enjoy playing it, and as long as we can afford to, we will continue to make content for that game. And
it's such a fun stage of development, the post-launch, like games as a service stuff these days, especially when your title's premium and you got multiplayer in there as well. It's like, and it's our game Armello, about just like a digital board game about fighting animals, right? Like we had endless ideas for that, right? But Remnant, I can even imagine, is just like you must have to really force yourself to switch your brain off at night to stop thinking about it.
Remnant's easy because you just go through Crestone and it can be whatever world you want. Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, and awesome. That's the one thing I love about the IP is it literally has infinite potential settings and storylines and bosses, and you could just
very similar to that Stargate kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly.
That's world,
right. Hell yeah, guys. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to the two of you. You've obviously had a ton of success already with Remnant I and Remnant II, but I wish you the best of success moving forward. You've got something really special on your hands, and not just with the game, but with the studio too. So thanks for hanging out.
Yeah,
thank you so much.